I call to order the informal interactive dialogue of the General Assembly on commodity markets. I would like to extend a warm welcome to all of you. This meeting, held in accordance with Resolution 78/138 of 19 December 2023, is convened to review world commodity trends and prospects and possible strategies for economic and export diversification, as well as value addition for sustainable development, particularly in commodity-dependent developing countries, with the aim of sharing experiences and lessons learned. I will now deliver a statement from the President. Ms. Rebecca Greenspan, Secretary General of UNCTAD, Excellencies, invited panelists, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great pleasure to welcome you all to this General Assembly's informal interactive dialogue on commodity markets, a subject of special importance to so many countries in the Global South, whose development is constrained by the vagaries of global markets for such products. I am particularly grateful to the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development for their robust support and partnership in organizing this event, a commitment evidenced by the presence with us here today of Ms. Rebecca Greenspan, its distinguished Secretary General, who will contextualize our discussion by delivering a keynote address. Commodities, the basic goods and raw materials that form the bedrock of global trade, are integral to the global economy. These commodities, ranging from cereals in our meals, to cotton in our clothes, to the copper in our electronics, underpin production, consumption, and trade worldwide. While commodity markets are vital to the global economy, excessive dependence on commodities can create adverse consequences for a nation's economic sustainability and the well-being of its people. Globally, commodity dependence, defined as a scenario where 60% or more of a country's export revenue depends on basic goods, is disproportionately affects developing countries in particular. Consider that, according to the most recent UNCTAD State of Commodity Dependence report, only 13% of advanced economies, particularly Australia and Norway, are commodity dependent. By contrast, a staggering 85% of the world's least developed countries are commodity dependent. A majority of landlocked developing countries and small island developing states also find themselves in similar situations of commodity dependence, rendering their economies vulnerable and highly susceptible to external shocks. The fact that the number of commodity-dependent developing countries has increased from 94 to 99 between 2002-2004 on the one hand, and 2020 to 2022 on the other, should sound the alarm bell for us, because addressing the issue of commodity dependence is key to the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and achieving the SDGs. Peculiar challenges faced by commodity-dependent economies are many and varied, including that commodity-dependent countries frequently grapple with issues such as sluggish productivity, income volatility, overvalued exchange rates, and heightened economic and political instability. Such dependence leaves economies vulnerable to external shocks and fluctuations in international market prices. An overwhelming 95% of the 20 countries most vulnerable to climate change are commodity-dependent developing countries, further exacerbating their economic and social challenges. In addition, the devastating impact of commodity dependence, particularly its effect on limiting foreign exchange earnings, remains highly problematic at a time when global public debt has reached grossly unsustainable levels. Furthermore, amid global discussions on debt sustainability and the reform of the international financial architecture, it is crucial that we address commodity dependence with the urgency the matter deserves. I believe that breaking free from commodity dependence, while challenging, is indeed achievable. I say so mindful of the success stories of countries like Costa Rica and Malaysia, which provide examples of viable pathways that can be emulated by other countries. Costa Rica transitioned from primarily trading bananas and coffee to exporting services and medical instruments. Similarly, Malaysia shifted from producing mostly rubber and tin to manufacturing electronics. These cases, among many others, highlight valuable lessons in economic diversification and emphasize the importance of implementing policies that both capitalize on opportunities while managing risks associated with economic transitions. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I close by urging you all to take today's mandated dialogue as an opportunity to take stock of world commodity trends, prospects, and strategies for economic and export diversification, particularly insofar as it affects commodity-dependent developing countries. I therefore look forward to your deliberations on specific strategies that commodity-dependent countries can adopt to enhance their technological capacity and innovation ecosystems. I encourage discussions that focus on key sectors and financing mechanisms which hold the greatest potential to drive structural transformation, economic diversification, and resilience in commodity-dependent developing countries. I am also hopeful that member states and other stakeholders will consider how the international community can support sustainable and inclusive diversification efforts in commodity-dependent developing countries. Lastly, I do believe that the great work that agencies like UNCTAD have produced over the years on enhancing the productive capacity of many vulnerable countries must be fully leveraged for the benefit of especially the LDCs. Together we can transform challenges into opportunities for diversification, inclusive growth, and sustainable development. I thank you. I now give the floor to Ms. Rebecca Greenspan, Secretary General of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. Secretary General.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Your Excellency Dennis Francis, President of the United Nations General Assembly. Thank you for this invitation, for this event that is so important. We were precisely, before coming here, talking about this, dear President, that we have like a kind of deja vu of former times talking about this again, yes? That is why this event is so important and so timely. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, dear friends, it is my great honor to be here today to talk about commodities and commodity dependence, an issue that has been at the heart of our work at UNCTAD. We have two high-level sessions today featuring world-class researchers and on-the-ground policymakers. To set the stage, I would like to share with you three thoughts. First, and the PGA already alluded to this very, very clearly, is the fact that the problem is getting worse. The list of commodity-dependent countries has grown by 15 countries in the last 15 years. So we have one country per year coming into commodity dependence again. Decisive action is needed to tackle the persistence of this challenge. There are 95 commodity-dependent developing countries, as was said by the president, almost half the entire UN membership. Most countries of South America, the Pacific, the Middle East, and Sub-Saharan Africa are commodity-dependent. This includes, as it also was said, but by groups, 66% of seeds, 83% of LDCs, and 85% of landlocked developing countries. As the PGA said, 29 of the 32 countries with low Human Development Index are commodity dependent, and as are a staggering 95% of the 20 countries most vulnerable to climate change. What this means, very simply, is that the status quo of the last 30 years has not worked for commodity-dependent countries. Much of this has to do with many of the recommendations that we heard before, for example, in the Washington Consensus, which called for rapid liberalization of currency markets and a quick winding down of trade policies with no policies implemented for the domestic industries and the so-called losers in the process. We still remember the phrase, the best industrial policy is no industrial policy at all. Mm-hmm. How times have changed, yes. In combination, this made currencies even more volatile and domestic industries even more uncompetitive. I want to emphasize this point because people often blame the victim when they talk about commodity dependence. This might be true in some cases, but when 90-plus countries and counting are dealing with the same issue, the problem is clearly also systemic. We need a new consensus that puts diversification and structural transformation at the center of the debate. My second thought refers to our research that shows again and again that commodity dependence represents a trap of development, a cycle, as you said very well, President, of vulnerability and a source of inequality. Why it is a trap of development? Because commodity dependence hinders the growth of other economic sectors, what many times is called the resource curse or the Dutch disease. This happens thanks to the central paradox of commodities, the fact that they are too great a source of wealth, so that all domestic industries struggle to compete. Since commodities crowd out investments into other sectors, thanks to a number of channels. Local currency appreciation, as was said, which makes other exports less competitive, disincentives to invest elsewhere due to the relatively higher profitability of commodities, and lastly, the false perception that all is well in the boom times, leading to the even falser notion that structural transformation is not necessary after all. And yet it is, in our research, with the exception of some oil-rich countries in the Gulf, Australia, New Zealand, Norway are good examples that there is cases of countries escaping this trap. But that is not possible without undergoing structural transformation and diversification. So commodity dependence is also a cycle of vulnerability, as I said before, given its exposure to the ups and downs of commodity prices, making countries prone to boom and bust cycles, which are unruly, unbalanced, and politically unstable. Here, the role of currencies is particularly important. When commodity prices boom, so does the inflow of foreign currency, rapidly driving up the value of the local currency. As mentioned, this makes other exports less competitive. But worse is what happens in the downturn. When the boom time ends, with commodity prices in decline, capital flows revert quickly and the local currency collapses suddenly. This abrupt reversal fuels inflation and can also make foreign currency denominated debt hard to service, leading to debt crisis. This is what is known in policy circles as the sudden stops problem of commodity dependence. Needless to say, this volatility also undermines confidence and deters long-term investments in other sectors. The few countries. Now, and it is also true that when you are going down, poverty and inequality go down very quickly. But when you recover, poverty and inequality are more sticky to improve. And so cycles of volatility, even when you recover, gets you into a cycle of more poverty and inequality that is difficult to combat. So the few countries that have become high income while being commodity dependent, as I mentioned earlier, have done so in part by undertaking strong contra-cyclical policies. This was underpinned by many things, including the creation of strong sovereign wealth funds, which saved during boom times, invested in future growth sectors, and then used its savings to cushion the impact of downturns. And obviously, transparency, taxation, and good governance, which minimizes corruption and ensures fiscal responsibility. It takes much wisdom and vision to defer consumption during boom times, but these sorts of policies do make a difference. And lastly, commodity dependence is also a source of inequality, given that it naturally leads to the formation of so-called dual economies marked on the one hand by a weak and informal domestic sector, and on the other hand, a formal commodity export industry, where well-paying jobs tend to cluster. This tends to fuel a small, well-connected elite, while the rest of the population struggles with low wages. These dynamics also exacerbates many times rural-urban divides, as opportunities may be concentrated around cities and extraction sites, drawing people away from agriculture and traditional livelihoods without offering sufficient alternative employment. This inequality undermines social cohesion and political stability. It generates a disconnect between vast resource wealth and people struggling to make ends meet. In short, the political economy of the cycle can be very pernicious, benefiting disproportionately one sector during the boom times, hurting disproportionately the poor during the bust. My third and last point relates to geopolitics and the energy transition. The current trade regime is now increasingly being contested from within, thanks to growing protectionism and subsidy-based industrial policies to which only countries with ample fiscal space have access. At the same time, the imperative for the energy transition is creating new commodity wealth, new opportunities, especially in regions already dealing with issues of dependence. Africa, for example, is home to 48% of the world's reserves of cobalt and manganese, 80% of the world's reserves of phosphate rock, and 92% of the world's reserves of platinum. These minerals are critical for electrical cars, solar panels, and batteries. And yet, there is a risk that new commodity wealth, while have a lot of opportunities, may lead to new forms of commodity dependence. While Africa is rich in critical minerals, it only has 1% of the global installed photovoltaic capacity and receives only 2% of the foreign direct investment in the energy, in renewable energy, only 2%. So most of the value added of green value chains is still captured elsewhere. Some countries, however, are fighting back. Indonesia banned the export of raw nickel ore in 2020, forcing importers to invest in factories in the country that ensure more intermediate and final products would be built there. Chile, Argentina, Bolivia are discussing how to better take advantage of their lithium industry. Though these moves have been controversial, it is clear that there is now an opportunity to leverage these new commodities to update our policies and trade regime, promote structural diversification, and turn the tide of commodity dependence once and for all. But let me be clear here. This is something that we need to do in a multilateral way. Developing countries, and especially commodity-dependent countries, need a universally agreed rules-based system. A trade regime based on the power game and geopolitics would be the worst of all worlds. And our countries, small countries, cannot play that game with benefit for our economies. Here, the role of the UN and its General Assembly on, obviously, the international organizations cannot be overstated. Today, the Secretary General will be launching the panel of experts to advise him on what could be common principles for fair and sustainable production and trade of critical minerals. The UN Trade and Development is actively supporting the preparatory work of this panel. This week, we hosted in Geneva a Trade and Development Commission specially dedicated to critical minerals. We look forward to furthering this work in these great halls of the General Assembly. Your Excellencies, I want to leave you with a message of hope. Commodity dependence is a trap from which countries can escape. There are actually many ways to do it. Sometimes countries can escape through manufacturing, as was mentioned by the PGA in the case of Malaysia, which went from being a country dependent on rubber to becoming one of the top global exporters of surgical gloves and end products with much greater value added. I thank the PGA for mentioning my country, Costa Rica, which diversified through both services and manufacturing. And I was in Costa Rica's government when this was happening, yes? So I can tell you a lot of stories about it. When I was born, Costa Rica was a country of bananas and coffee. In my own lifetime, through a mix of strategic investments in education, healthcare, and a stable political environment, we successfully diversified. And we are now top exporters of medical equipment, a regional hub for software development, and a global example of ecotourism, a sector we pioneered. This transformation was not easy, and it did not happen overnight, but it shows that escaping commodity dependence is possible even within a single generation. Of course, countries like mine did not do this alone. While our efforts were key, favorable external conditions played a role. We must create these same conditions for other commodity-dependent nations. This means fairer trade rules, more support for technology transfer, and greater investment in sustainable, resilient infrastructure across the developing world. Your Excellencies, in closing, the UN system and the General Assembly in particular was created precisely for moments like this, when a shared global problem demands a shared global solution. Time is of the essence. The window of opportunity to transform The energy transition into a force for inclusive development is closing. Let us seize this chance before it's too late. Let this assembly be the place where point turns, where we move from debate to decisions, from principles to policies, from dependence to delivery. This is our historic responsibility. I thank you.
I thank the Secretary General of UNCTAD for her statement. As indicated in the program, this meeting consists of 2 interactive panels and a closing segment. The first interactive panel will focus on the question, is there a modern-day commodity dependence trap? And the second one will focus on economic diversification to reduce dependence and increase the resilience of commodity-dependent developing countries. Both interactive panel discussions will be moderated by Ms. Jennifer Hughes, U.S. Markets Editor for the Financial Times. I invite the moderator and the speakers for the first interactive panel to take their seats at the podium. I welcome Ms. Jennifer Hughes, U.S. Markets Editor for the Financial Times, and our distinguished panelists to this meeting. Before handing over to the moderator, I would like to remind delegations that, as indicated in the journal, there is no established list of speakers for this meeting. Delegations wishing to speak will be invited to press the microphone button. Delegations speaking on behalf of groups are invited to approach the list of speakers table and will be given priority. I now hand over the meeting to Ms. Hughes. The opening segment is now concluded.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to be involved in these discussions. It really is an honor to be here today, and forgive me, this is my first panel moderation at the United Nations, so I really am truly honored to be here. As mentioned, my name is Jennifer Hughes. I'm the US Markets Editor of the Financial Times, a news organization I'm sure many of you know. I am based here in New York, but as you will also know, I'm part of a network of reporters spanning the world. I would like to start by welcoming you to this interactive panel, the first one of our day, and it will focus on the question, is there a modern-day commodity dependence trap? Before we begin, I would like to thank our panelists and also introduce them. And I'll start with Venusia Noguera, is Executive Director of the International Coffee Organization, a group that was created in 1963 under the auspices of the United Nations. The ICO represents 93% of the coffee produced in the world and 64% of the consumption. It's bringing together exporting and importing governments with the aim of strengthening the global coffee sector. Venusia, thank you very much for being here. We also have Jane Nalunga, is Executive Director, Southern and Eastern African Trade Information and Negotiations Institute, CIATINI, and Jane, tell me I got that correct. Fantastic. A regional think tank promoting policies for trade, investment to boost development and processes for sustained equitable development and improved livelihood in the region. And then lastly, we have Mr. Guangzhou Chu, is the director of the FAO, or Food and Agriculture Organization, liaison office within the United Nations in New York. He joined the office in January 2021, having joined the FAO headquarters in 2019 as special advisor to the Director General. Mr. Chu has been engaging with international organizations and bilateral relations since 1997. So thank you, panelists. It's wonderful, really, to be able to share the stage with you today. We've heard from Ms. Greenspan about the daunting challenges, but also the potential opportunities that we see here. You know, in addition to long-running issues, which you're all familiar with, more recently we've seen the crises we've been talking about, such as the pandemic, conflicts, the effects of climate change. And the effects of these are ongoing and unknowable in some cases. The net result is additional uncertainty in planning, in policy making, in capital flows. This unpredictability brings confusion and doubt, and that hits hardest those people who can least cope with it. I won't go through many of the figures because we've heard some given already, but we know that there's a lot that needs to be done here. So you didn't come to listen to me. I'd rather get to our panelists, and I will start with them in a second. We will hold our discussion, and thereafter, as mentioned, the floor will be open for comments, observations, and questions. There is no established list of speakers. Delegations wishing to speak after our panel are requested to press the microphone button now. They will be called to speak after our discussion. Delegations speaking on behalf of groups are invited to approach the list of speakers table and will be given priority. Now, turning to the panel, Vanusia, I'll start with you. Let's keep this general. Please, what does a commodity trap look like to you, speaking from your experiences?
Thank you, Jennifer.
No? Microphone on.
Thank you, Jennifer. First of all, I would like to thank the United Nations and also the UNCTAD to invite us to be here today. It's very important to have voice in many of the events and many of the representations and representatives with the representatives from all the countries, because this is what we believe. I come from one family of commodity producers. My family produces coffee for more than a century in Brazil. Currently, I'm leading one organization that was created here. During the early 60s, the United Nations supported all the country members that at that moment was facing one very prices and very crisis about demand and supply in coffee, to create the first international coffee agreement, and just after that to create the International Coffee Organization to operate and to take care of this agreement. ICO is tackling the challenge of the coffee sector. As was already mentioned, we have around 90 countries classified as commodity dependents. 33 of them produce coffee, some with a very high coffee share of their merchandise exports. We have right now 12.5 million farms in the world, with 25 million families of farmers and employees, what means 125 million people working with coffee just in the producing countries. 70% of this labor it's made by women. And it's a very hard work in the plantations, taking care of these trees, of these crops, and doing a very, very hard work. And then talking about one of the SDGs, 5.5 million of these farmers live below the poverty line. Practically in all coffee-producing countries, the farms' incomes are far below the living income. You can ask me, are you crazy? Why are you in coffee? Why are you still on this with such a level of poverty, such a lack of support? And I can say to you that in many of these countries, unfortunately, there is no option out of commodities. This is the way that we are living in many of these most vulnerable countries. But I also can say that the world needs these commodities. The world needs foods, needs raw materials, as just said here, needs the minerals, needs everything. And then, in my opinion, and this is the strategy that we have in ICO, we need collectively find ways to recognize and add values to these producers and to these commodities that we are talking about. Thank you.
Thank you. I think, my God, thank you, Vanessa. I really appreciate that. Jane, the same question to you. What's your experience of commodity traps?
Thank you so much, Jennifer. Excellencies and distinguished delegates, I'm honored for the opportunity to participate in this panel to discuss this very important issue of commodity dependence. My experience, which I'm going to share, is from Uganda. I'm from Uganda. Uganda is endowed with substantial natural resources, fertile soils. Until recently, the rainfall, some reserves of oil, and some deposits of minerals such as gold and copper. Despite these endowments, Uganda is designated as a least developing country, with over 30% of the population living below the poverty line, and that's according to the World Bank. Agriculture is the mainstay of the economy, employing about 70% of the population. Uganda's exports are mainly raw commodities, with the major exports being coffee. Others are tobacco, tea, cotton. Uganda has diversified into the export of non-traditional commodities, such as gold, fish, flowers, and the prices of these products are always fluctuating on the world market. Uganda's industrial sector is very small. Therefore, commodities make up more than 90% of Uganda's exports. However, the flip side of the export of low value-added commodities is the importation of finished value-added products such as machinery, chemicals, electronics, and vehicles. I would like to give an example. For example, in August 2002, total exports totaled up to $294.9 million US dollars, while total imports were $1,006.9 million US dollars. Therefore, just in 1 month in August, Uganda realized a trade deficit of $712 million US dollars. Uganda has been experiencing an ever-increasing trade deficit, worsening balance of payments and indebtedness as a result of this trade imbalance since the 1980s. Uganda's debt to GDP ratio has increased to 47.3 of GDP in 2023, with a cost of debt servicing rising to 30% of revenues mobilized going to repay interest and principal. Herein lies the essence of commodity dependence trap, whereby economies of countries like Uganda are structured by the export of largely unprocessed, low value-added raw commodities and the importation of manufactured and other industrial products. This unfair and unequal exchange is at the core of the commodity dependence trap. Government or governments in such situations remain with no resources and have to look for loans and grants to address the shortfalls, provide social services and infrastructure, and for reinvestments. There are a number of lessons to learn from Uganda's experience. One, diversification of primary commodities and even markets is not sufficient to get countries out of the commodity dependence. Indeed, there is also diversification from raw commodities to industrialized products. That again will not get us from the commodity dependence trap. It requires structural transformation involving enhanced productivity, development of a manufacturing sector based on agricultural production so that we have backward and forward linkages, and the rise of a modern services sector. And lastly, we need to be trading in these value-added products in domestic, regional, and global markets. Two, this will require a rethink and a reform of the trade, investment, industrial, and financial policies at national, regional, and global levels. I thank you.
Jane, thank you very much. That's a lot for us to be thinking about already. Guangzhou, can I come to you and please talk about what a commodity trap looks like to you from your FAO perspective?
Thank you, Jane, the moderator. I would like to share with you FAO's point of view on commodity dependence, especially related to global agriculture trade issues. FAO has supported member states for over 50 years with its expertise on global agriculture trade issues. With their dedicated markets and trade division, FAO maintains a comprehensive market intelligence service of the main agriculture commodities, provides analytical and policy-relevant information, and houses the secretariats of Committee on Commodity Problems, subsidiary intergovernmental commodity groups, the Agriculture Market Information Systems, which is under auspices of G20, and operates a global information and early warning system on food and agriculture. So how does commodity dependence occur? It occurs when a country's economy relies heavily on export of one or a few primary commodities, such as agricultural products, minerals, or oil. This over-reliance on narrow range of primary commodities increases the vulnerability of a country to shocks and affects its growth and development, leading to what we refer to a commodity dependence trap. Unfortunately, data shows that commodity dependence is more prevalent in developing and particularly low-income countries. Measuring dependence on the top 3 commodities, nearly 2/3 of developing countries are found to rely on primary commodity export for more than 50% of their export earnings. These countries, for instance, depend on export agricultural products like coffee, tea, bananas, cocoa, and cotton. As a result, these countries find themselves trapped in a situation of lack of economic growth and underdevelopment. Several consequences arise from falling into the trap, including economic vulnerability. The economy becomes highly sustainable to price fluctuation in the global market. For instance, if the price of the commodity falls, the country's export revenues and economic stability can be severely impacted. Second, limited economic diversification. Because of dependency, labor, capital, and other production resources become concentrated on one or a few commodities. This situation limits the country's ability to develop other economic sectors and hinders its long-term growth and development. Third, political and social instability. Exposure to fluctuation in commodity prices for independent countries can lead to political instability, social unrest, and even conflicts, especially when the income generated from the commodity export is significantly affected. Fourth, sustainability challenges. Dependence on the production and export to a few commodities can lead to environmental degradation and depletion of natural resources, which affects the country's capacity to achieve its sustainability objectives. Breaking out of the commodity-dependent trap is not an easy task. One important solution to escape this trap is diversification. Diversification reduces countries' vulnerability to commodity price fluctuations, enhances resilience to shocks, stimulates economic growth, improves income distribution, and promotes long-term sustainability. However, to effectively diverse economies and reduce dependence, countries need to scale up investment in infrastructure and reduce education and skill development, implement policies that promote entrepreneurship, innovation, and technology adoption, and strengthen institutions and governance, as well as public-private partnership. It is also important to underline that diversification requires a comprehensive, coordinated approach combining macroeconomic policies, investment policies, and strategies, and institutional reform unlock the full potential of a country's economy beyond its dependence on primary commodities. In agriculture, another important solution is the value chain development, which helps to create jobs and generate increased income in the countries through value addition. By integrating a value chain development approach into agriculture diversification, countries can achieve more efficient, inclusive, resilient, sustainable agri-food systems for better production, better nutrition, a better environment, and a better life for all. In conclusion, the commodity dependence trap represents a significant obstacle to achieve sustainable development goals and must be addressed urgently. It's important to recognize that commodity-dependent countries cannot do this alone. They require support from more advanced economies and international community. I thank you, Jennifer.
Guangzhou, thank you. These are some daunting challenges that you've posed here. Let's look at the experience in recent years. Have any characteristics of commodity dependence traps worsened or eased? What's happened in recent years? Is there anything we can learn from that. And Vanessa, I'll come to you first.
Well, Jennifer, I am a very positive and very optimistic person. And then I don't like to talk about something that it's worse, but to talk about something that it's better right now. One of the big examples that we have in coffee, and it's our benchmark, as was already mentioned here before, it's Costa Rica. Costa Rica, 40 years ago, it was a country that exported coffee and bananas. And this was the point for Costa Rica. In our days, Costa Rica, it's a country that it's having its economy very related to technology and are exporting a lot of products from the technology side. And then they are not anymore in this list of commodity dependents. We know that there is no standard solution that we can apply in all the countries. We would be very lucky on that, but we need to learn from these examples to go forward. And one of the things that we can learn is that it's not something that we can do in a short-term basis. We cannot think that we will change the situation in 2-3 years in one government. This needs to be a state politics that will take 30, 40 years, new generations to be ready for these new realities. This is something that we can learn from Costa Rica, and we can apply in many other countries. One point that I think it's very interesting to mention, it's, as I said in my opening, I come from a coffee producing family that is on this for more than a century. But until I can say to you that until probably 20 years ago, it was a little bit prohibited to speak loudly and openly about this kind of challenge, mainly with the private sector that it's involved on that. In our case, in coffee, we are in a free market, then we are very dependent on the private sector as well. And also with the consuming countries, where something that we were as producing countries suffering, but when we asked for help or we claimed for some changing, the people were like, this is not with me. This is not my business. I don't need to care about this. And now, during these last, I can say to you, these last 10 years, we started to talk more about sustainability, and sustainability it's involving environmental, social, and economic sustainability in all the levels of these supply chains in all the countries of the world. We need to tackle, if we really would like to achieve the goals of the SDGs, we need to tackle this, and we need to face these problems to address the solutions. And we are talking a lot about this kind of question. We are talking about diversification in many of these countries, diversification in the crop, in the plantation, in the land. We are talking about diversification of income that are related to maybe services to, in case of coffee, for example, to increase the internal consumption of coffee in these countries. And then we can support these new generations, the youngers, as I always say, the boys and girls, to open a coffee shop, to be a barista, to roast coffee, to know how to do this, and to have to be also entrepreneurs. But for this, we need support for these countries in order to increase their economies in general. And we think that we can do this all together, following the example, as I said in the beginning, of Costa Rica.
Thank you. It's always good to hear a positive example and to learn from that as well. Jane, I'm following up on one of the points you made, that diversification isn't sufficient. You mentioned in your opening remarks. How do we manage the structural changes to develop a more value-added system and not just diversify? Do you have thoughts on that?
Okay, thank you so much, Jennifer. Maybe the last question which you asked also, Vanessa, I don't have any positive examples of that. But what I want to say about diversification is that there has been diversification. For example, in Uganda, we have diversified. We are still exporting coffee, but we also export gold. We also export non-traditional crops like flowers, but all these are raw commodities. There is no value add, and the prices are fluctuating over time. So how do we address the issue of structural transformation? For me, I think the issue of structural transformation, as has been also pointed out by the previous speakers, is about overhauling the policies, industrial policies, trade policies, investment policies, to make sure that these policies support structural transformation. In Africa, we need to remember that commodity dependence is a colonial legacy. You know, our economies, we are structured in such a way that we provide raw commodities for the industries of the developed countries, and that we are market for the industrialized products. And that's how the relationship has been. And when you look at the successive policies, right from the structured adjustment programs, where they told us to privatize, liberalize, deregulate, all those policies have been in a way to be able to maintain that relationship. Today, again, when you look at the agreements we are signing, the European Union has been negotiating with Africa, Caribbean, and Pacific, they are former colonies, to negotiate economic partnership agreements. In Africa, there are a number of countries which have signed. Kenya, in the East African region, has signed. But when you look at this agreement, and African countries have been saying no to this agreement for the last more than 20 years. But EU has been pushing. When you look at this agreement, it, for example, continues to open up our economy, but also stops us from imposing export taxes. Export taxes are one of the tools which can be able to help us to grow our industries. So, Jennifer, what you are asking, the issue of structural transformation, it's about looking at enhancing and reforming and rethinking those policies, but also looking at overhauling, like the Secretary General of UNCTAD has pointed out, overhauling and reforming the entire multilateral trading system. Thank you.
Thank you. That's very informative. Guangzhou, is there anything you wanted to add from the FAO perspective?
Thank you, my colleagues. Thank you, Jennifer. From perspective of FAO, as President of General Assembly mentioned in his opening remark, the commodity dependence trap disproportionately affect the three categories of most vulnerable countries, like small island, developing states and the least developing country and the landlocked countries. So in my view is how to address this issue. Two keywords very important, the diversification and the resilience building in those countries. So FAO to introduce several flagship initiatives to help those countries to get out of the trap. Especially, we have hand-in-hand initiative. This is a evidenced, country-led and country-owned initiative to accelerate agricultural transformation. So our main purpose is to achieve that goal through agri-food systems transformation and help those achieve that goal to get out of dependent trap. Thank you.
Thank you. Look, we've said already that we are living in an uncertain world, geopolitics, economic uncertainty, and we're dealing with climate change as well. How do you see commodity-dependent, trapped countries faring in the foreseeable future without any intervention or additional support? If nothing is done, what happens next? Vanessa?
Well, just complementing a little bit our last panelist, Guancho. This accelerated agriculture transformation, this is key for all this process. I will talk now, I will make an observation as a Brazilian citizen. I'm not sure if the Brazilian delegate that it's there will agree with me, but I think Brazil, it's one huge example of that. We are still a country that is commodity dependent, but we have a very good example in how to transform agriculture. We used to have a very, very traditional agriculture, including for coffee, for many, 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 many years. And now, with a lot of technology, a lot of innovation, with our one research company that celebrated 51 years yesterday, Embrapa, we have examples to apply in Brazil and also to share with the world how to do this kind of transformation. And this is very important now for climate change, for the issues and the challenge that we are facing for climate change. We need probably to change the areas that we could plant, but we cannot cut our trees anymore. This is already recognized worldwide that we need to preserve our forestries. But otherwise, if we don't change the methods to produce food or to do the agro, it will be very difficult to have food for the world, for the population. And so we need to change a little bit the methods, and in some cases to include this diversification, this intercrop system, as we say. It's very, very useful. We can have, together with coffee, for example, fruit trees that will have the shadow, and then the temperature can be lower, and we will have also avocados, we will have papayas in many countries, we will have many different macadamias, we have many different fruits that we can have in the same area. The challenge that the people are saying to me right now is that, okay, Vanusi, we have the avocados, we have the papayas, but we don't have market for that. And we need to support them. We need to support to have these markets for that. And again, as I already said, we need collaboration. Collaboration, it's for me, it's key. Cooperation, Next year will be the year of the cooperatives here in the UN. And I think this is key for all this process that we are in, all to face all this the challenge and address solutions for this challenge. Talking specifically about coffee, there is one opportunity that we have with climate change. We have two key varietals of coffee, that is the Arabica coffee and the Robusta coffees. The Robusta coffees is to be used mostly for instant coffees, soluble coffees, because this used to be a very low quality of coffee. Then it was not good for espressos and mainly for brewers. Now, with this challenge, Robusta coffee, it's much more resistant to high temperatures. And then we have worldwide a lot of research looking for improving the quality of the Robusta coffees. And then we will have a new market for these coffees. And for example, for Uganda, that it's a huge Robusta coffee producer in the world. We are managing these to have new opportunities for them in a more add-valued market. We are still talking about the raw material, the coffee as a coffee bean as a raw material, but we are talking about one step above in values for these coffees.
Thank you. There's a lot in there. Jane, perhaps you could address a question from your perspective. What happens if action isn't taken here, and what actions can you see?
Thank you so much, Jennifer. So what happens if nothing is done? What's going to happen is that a number of countries which are caught up in this commodity dependence trap are going to remain at the low end of the global value chain and the world system. And what does this mean? This means more poverty for those countries and also poverty for the people. There are trends which we need to be mindful of. Because of the commodity dependence, there is a lot of fragmentation in the economies of these commodity dependence countries. Fragmentation where agriculture is not linked to industry and it's not linked to the service sector, it's not linked to trade. We produce, we export, we don't add value. So that lack of backward and forward linkages is causing a lot of challenges, especially in rural economies and rural transformation. Karim, you talked about living a good life, you know? So if we are to make sure that the millions of small-scale producers who are producing coffee, cocoa, they need to live a better life. They need to have a sustainable income. And this can be done only if we can be able to do those linkages and to be able to undertake structural transformation. Another issue which is also coming up these days is the issue of the financialization of commodity trade. There are a number of multinational companies who are now capturing the profits from commodity trade. So even when commodity prices are going up, like what's happening today, cocoa, coffee prices are up, the national governments and even the farmers are not getting part of that increased price, but it's taken by the companies. And the implication here is that these countries are going to continue being indebted, continue being poor. You know, for me, I think this is an issue of justice, an issue of human rights. And I think, Jennifer, we shouldn't say what happens if there are no intervention, we should say, how should we address this issue? How should we intervene to be able to stop this commodity dependence problem? Thank you.
Just complementing what Jane just said, I remember 2 key points about this, Jenny. While we are increasing the poverty, we have 2 very, very important and serious risks that we need to challenge and we need to face and to address. First of all, it's very difficult for all of us to keep the youth together with us in agro, in commodities, because they don't see any kind of perspective. And if they don't have perspective, why they will be on that? In many of the countries that I'm visiting, I'm in London right now, leading the ICO for 2 years. And I'm traveling a lot. I'm going to many of these the producing countries in the world. And what in many cases the new generation is saying to me, it's that, Vanuzia, I want to be in the town. I go to the town, I will be a TikToker, I will be a YouTuber, influencer, that I will get much more money than to try to manage this land that it's from my family. And if they go, it's very difficult to come back because they will be in another kind of reality, and they will not wish to come back to the lands, to the field. But from the other hand, if they are not, they don't have success, then we have the second key point that it's, for me, it's a huge issue for all of us that we need to face, that it's the immigration. If they don't have good lives in their countries, they will try to have these good lives in another way, in another place. And we need to manage this as well. I'm sure that the majority of the refugees that we have right now, the majority of this immigration that the people that are trying to enter into Europe, to enter into here, they are not doing this because they don't like their countries. I'm sure that they like so much their countries. They are suffering to leave their families there, but they are looking for a better life for them and for their families in their poor countries.
Jane, I'm going to take you up on your challenge there. We've talked about what will happen, what the picture looks like if nothing is done. And you mentioned there we want to talk about what can be done. We have a number of countries who want to make statements. So we'll move to the sort of the last question we planned for this panel. And what can be done to help top down? Like, what collective action can be taken by member states? What do you want to say to the room here about what do you want to see first?
Thank you so much. What can be done by member states? One, to reform the global economic governance to better align it with and to support national and regional strategies and policies for structural transformation. I think there is also a need to reform all these policies, to rethink, but also to rethink the extractivist model of development, where everything is extracted without, any compensation, without thinking even about the future. The issue of reforms is important, reforming the policies, because the current policies can't help these commodity-dependent countries to be able to industrialize. And I think there is also, for countries who are commodity dependent, they also need to rethink their policies, they need to rethink their agreement. And I think it's also important for goodwill, to have goodwill from developed countries. I give you an example. African countries put in place the Africa Mining Vision. It's a very, very good initiative to help African countries to be able to add value to their minerals. But immediately the European Union put in place the Critical Minerals Initiative, and it has been upgraded to the Critical Minerals Act, to make sure that they get the minerals from Africa. And that's why, like I have pointed out, you see the European Union negotiating with its former colonies economic partnership agreements, where one of the provision is not to impose export taxes. So there are some of these issues which we need to rethink, and we need a lot of support, a lot of goodwill from the global community to make sure that there is fairness, there is justice in the world, and that we can't keep a group of people in poverty. For me, I think this is the way I look at it. There has to be justice, there has to be fairness. Let us review the global economic governance. Thank you.
Vanusia.
Jennifer, I have one example here that I think it's working quite well. 4 years ago, more or less in 2019, between 2019 and 2020, just before the pandemic period, in the ICO, the country members realized that we cannot do anything alone. And then it was created what we called the ICO Coffee Public and Private Task Force, that in nowadays is considered one of the biggest initiatives that we have in the world for just for one commodity, involving the governments from the producing side and from the consuming side, from the consuming countries, and also the key players from the private sector and the civil society. We had and we built a roadmap that involved more than 3,000 people on that, all of them key stakeholders in the world. And we are working right now in many initiatives related to remodulate the agriculture, or that means the regenerative agriculture, circular economy, and in the basic things that are to improve the living income or to achieve the living income for these producers in order to go to the prosperity, because this is our goal. We don't think that to have, they are below the level of poverty, but we think that to have only the living income, it's not enough. It's not fair with these producers. What we would like is to have the prosperity for them. They need to be considered people that can be prosperous. They cannot be shy to look for prosperity and to have as a standard that they will be poor for all their lives and for all their family lives. And we are working on that. In nowadays, we are working in 29 different countries in the world about this, with some in different states. As I already said, there is no standard solution. We need to do case by case, country by country, in some countries, region by region. But we are building with these countries the national plans that with public initiatives and also private sector initiatives supported by the international companies, the international development agencies, and banks and the countries, the developed countries. We are all together building these plans and putting in place these national plans, these national initiatives for addressing the major challenge, at least to improve the level of life of all these people. And I think with a good life, a good level of life, a good level of income, they will get the opportunity to have a better education, a better health, and their children will have another kind of life because they will have many different opportunities. As I said before, it's not a short-term solution. We need to think in a long-term basis.
Thank you, Vanessa. Guangzhou, have you anything to add?
Thank you, moderator. In my view, in my earlier remarks, I said dependence countries are mostly are three categories countries: Cs, LDC, and LDCs. They have very complex underlying causes. Some due to limited natural resources, some due to very limited land size, some due to very isolated location, very distant to world market, or they are climate vulnerable for those countries. So we need to coordinate holistic and comprehensive solution for these countries. In my view, the first thing is a awareness and consensus building for importance address the commodity dependence issue for those countries. The second one is international community, including those advanced economies and development UNA agencies and the private sector, to provide policy recommendation and an analysis to those countries on how to avoid dependence or get out of the dependence trap. For example, FAO has a one country, one priority initiative. That means FAO providing information to those countries. What type of commodities is good for your country, and provide you information, data and analysis, and what kind of agriculture product is good for your country. That produce a comparative strength or comparative advantage to other countries. The third one is the investment and the financing. This is always an issue for those countries. The fourth one, international collaboration, is the key. So we need a convergence. Despite of many initiatives from different countries or different agencies, we need consensus. We need convergence. How to address this issue? I thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you, Guangzhou. And thank you to the panelists. I'd now like to open the floor for comments and statements. We've only scratched the surface with the remarks we've had from our panel so far. Delegations wishing to speak are requested still to press the microphone button. In order to ensure we hear as many speakers as possible, delegations are requested to limit their statements to 3 minutes when speaking in their national capacity and 5 minutes when speaking on behalf of a group of states. I will now turn the floor over. I now give the floor to the representative for Malaysia.
Thank you, Madam Moderator and distinguished panelists. Commodities play a crucial role in the economies of many developing countries. From Malaysia's experience, for decades, agriculture-based commodities has helped lift millions of Malaysians out of poverty. Although Malaysia has successfully diversified its economy and become a major global manufacturer of electronics, commodities remain a significant component of our economy. Commodities continue to significantly contribute to national socio-economic growth and job creation, and this is not without challenges. Malaysia has first-hand experience with the challenges and opportunities arising from commodity dependence. We acknowledge that the commodity dependence trap still exists, and palm oil and rubber are prime examples. With the commodity dependence trap evolving, new challenges emerged. For example, there is an increasing demand for sustainable and environmentally friendly agri-commodity products. Therefore, Malaysia has introduced the Malaysian Sustainable Palm Oil MSPO certification scheme in 2015, and it was made mandatory beginning January 2020 to ensure good practices are consistently implemented along the entire supply chain of Malaysia's palm oil. To date, more than 92% of the country's total oil palm planted area has been MSPO certified. In doing so, Malaysia continues to ensure that its palm oil industry is well regulated with relevant laws and regulations governing quality and safety, environmental management, forest conservation, labor, and employee safety and health, and land matters. Malaysia has also developed the Malaysian Sustainable Natural Rubber, MSNR, as a guiding document to produce sustainable natural rubber in Malaysia. It takes into account the needs and challenges of Malaysian rubber smallholders, rubber dealers, and standard Malaysia rubber processors. Madam Moderator and distinguished panelists, we believe that collective action is crucial to address the commodity dependence trap. Member states must work together to promote sustainable agriculture practices, develop new technologies, and diversify economies. We must also address various trade barriers and promote fair market access while supporting climate change mitigation and adaptation efforts. Let us work together to tackle challenges relating to the commodity dependence trap in our efforts to build a more resilient, sustainable, and equitable future for all. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the representative of Indonesia. Thank you.
I thank the President of the General Assembly for convening this meeting and the UNCTAD Secretary General for her insightful remarks. I also thank the panelists for their presentations. Excellencies, the importance of commodities to jumpstart economic development in developing countries cannot be overstated. Yet, it is important to see primary commodities not as an end goal, but rather as means to reach the next stage of development, while at the same time ensure sustainability. This requires a broader policy that enhances productive capacity, value addition, and job creation in developing countries. Neglecting the necessity for developing countries to add values to their commodities will leave developing countries vulnerable to commodity price fluctuations and real exchange rate misalignment, hence hindering global progress to attain the SDGs. Against this backdrop, I wish to underscore 2 points. First, discussing commodities must be placed in a bigger context of global economic resilience and sustainable growth. This requires economic diversification and of developing countries, based on broad and sustainable industrial policy frameworks, supported by an enabling global environment. Supporting the right to development of developing countries must be seen as a pillar to achieve global economic resilience and turbocharge SDGs implementation. Second, supporting downstream strategies in the developing world is a win-win solution. It will enable countries to ensure their commodities better contribute to the prosperity of their people, provide mutually beneficial investment opportunities with other countries, strengthen the resilience of global value chains, and enhance environmental sustainability by reducing carbon footprint of commodities trade. In Indonesia, downstream policies, including those concerning critical minerals, have helped to reduce inequality, increase national tax revenue, and support the transition to green industries and sustainable transport, while at the same time expanding opportunities for foreign direct investments. If I may conclude with the questions, how can developing countries better synergize the nexus of trade, investment, and industrial policies that will lead to a more optimum use of their commodities? I thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the representative of Germany.
Thank you, moderator, for giving me the floor, and thank you to the panelists for the stimulating discussion. I'd like to touch upon 3 points. First is external dependencies. The second is local value added, which is a first step out of the trap. And the third is sustainability. The need for a number of critical raw materials has increased immensely, and one reason is the global energy transition. One of the main geoeconomic challenges we face at the moment. Secretary Greenspan has touched upon this. Germany, together with its EU partners, have taken steps towards securing access and processing of its critical raw materials. Germany has updated its own raw materials strategy in 2023, and just has also launched a new critical raw materials fund to support investment in projects. And the European Union, has just last month adopted the European Critical Raw Materials Act, which will enter into force within a short time. This will reduce dependence for processing from individual third countries. These measures aim to reduce external dependencies. The fact is the EU and Germany will remain dependent to a large degree on imports of these raw materials. And that is why we strengthen our global partnerships on critical raw materials, which reduce the risk of weaponized dependencies and which foster sustainable extraction and processing, as well create local value added. We hope that we can achieve that bilaterally with international partners, but also in larger formats, just as the Minerals Security Partnership Forum, which brings together industrialized as well as resource-rich nations. In our view, it is of great importance to also create local value in the extracting countries for the benefit of the local population, which means that we do not see pure extraction as a solution, but we want to bring about a win-win situation for all partners. Governments create only the frameworks for companies to take action. We still need the private sector to decide, invest or trade to secure its supply chains and make them more resilient. In close cooperation with its partner countries, Germany aims to ameliorate the framework conditions in the raw material sector through bilateral and regional projects, as well as supporting multi-stakeholder initiatives, such as the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative. We support our partner countries to minimize risks for people, the environment and the climate when extracting and processing raw materials. By promoting sustainability and transparency, Germany also contributes to strengthening resilience in transnational raw material supply chains. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Благодарю, госпожа председатель. И хотелось бы благодарить уважаемых докладчиков. Очень интересная дискуссия. Безусловно, тема заседания относится к числу основных вызовов, с которыми сталкивается большинство развивающихся стран. Сегодня генсекретарь ЮНКТАД, уважаемые эксперты, уже представили методы избавления от зависимости на основе внутренних ресурсов. Но не стоит забывать, что корни сырьевой зависимости уходят в период колониального господства. Это также отмечалось сегодня на заседании. Когда западными странами в своих колониях сознательно выстраивалась сырьевая структура экономик под потребности колонизаторов. И сегодня глобальный юг требует от бывших метрополий обеспечить передачу технологий, вложиться в наращивание потенциала, развивать инфраструктуру, поддерживать индустриализацию. Оправданно говорить о моральном императиве в этом отношении. Мы считаем, что исправление исторической несправедливости, принятие на себя развитыми странами общей, но дифференцированной ответственности за диверсификацию экономик стран, зависящих от сырьевого экспорта, помогло бы разомкнуть порочный круг сырьевой зависимости, достичь устойчивого всеохватного экономического роста, существенно повысить благосостояние миллионов людей. Однако, как мы видим даже сегодня, политика западных стран на закрепление сырьевой отсталости и роль развивающихся стран как сырьевого придатка, к сожалению, сохраняется. Это заметно не только в отрасли кофе, но и, например, в отрасли алмазов. Еще одним немаловажным аспектом является обеспечение стабильности на товарно-сырьевых рынках. После длительного кризиса, совпавшего с пандемией COVID-19, ключевые рынки постепенно стабилизируются. Во многом на эту стабилизацию влияет выведение Российской Федерации на мировые рынки дополнительных объемов продовольствия. Тем не менее, длительная черта всплесков и падений котировок вынудила международных экспертов обратить внимание на спекулятивный характер товарно-сырьевых рынков, а также чрезмерное влияние на них крупных транснациональных корпораций. В завершение позвольте коснуться проблемы новых и возникающих вызовов. Генсекретарь ЮНКТАД уже затронул эту тему. Из-за энергоперехода прогнозируется повышение спроса на редкоземельные металлы, такие как литий, кобальт, графит. Большая часть залежей приходится на развивающиеся страны. Помимо очевидных экономических выгод для обладателей этого стратегического сырья, уже на этом этапе следует выделить ряд серьезных рисков такой экспортно-сырьевой модели развития. Они имеют прямое отношение к нашей дискуссии. Речь, в частности, о значительном возможном ущербе населению и окружающей среде. Во-вторых, именно развивающиеся страны, как мы считаем, должны быть главными бенефициарами, а не богатейшие западные компании. Отдельным вопросом стоят социальные гарантии местному населению. Наконец, для бесперебойных поставок и снижения сырьевой зависимости развивающие страны вправе настаивать на локализации у себя перерабатывающих мощностей. Надеемся, что запускаемая сегодня группа экспертов Генсекретаря услышит эти комментарии. Никто не должен остаться позади и в зависимости от сырьевых товаров. Благодарю за внимание.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the representative of Senegal.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la modératrice, et merci également aux panélistes pour ces discussions utiles sur un thème aussi important. Un thème qui ne fait que rappeler et remettre en surface les sempiternelles questions sur les inégalités de développement, les inégalités dans les relations commerciales, les partenariats économiques et la dichotomie entre la production et la consommation. Et je pense que la secrétaire générale de la CNUSET a déjà dressé les contours de la situation actuelle. C'est un tableau peu reluisant. Je vais m'abstenir de répéter ce qu'elle a déjà dit, notamment la production des richesses dans des pays qui sont extrêmement riches, mais qui sont très pauvres en même temps. C'est un paradoxe. Je voudrais juste souligner quelques points qui me paraissent intéressants et préalables pour aller de l'avant. Le premier point est juste sur le renforcement de capacité dans ces pays où on produit, où il y a ces produits-là. Le deuxième point est le transfert de technologie pour faciliter un peu la transformation dans les pays en développement. Le troisième point est le renforcement des politiques fiscales. Je pense que Madame l'a déjà abordé, de l'Ouganda. Essayer d'appliquer des taxes à l'exportation. Je pense que c'est un point crucial. Le quatrième point est un peu inviter les multinationales en partenariat avec les autorités étatiques à la transformation sur place des produits de base, c'est-à-dire créer un peu des clauses pour satisfaire la demande intérieure en partie et exporter le reste. Je pense que c'est un point de départ pour inverser les tendances. Et un dernier point, je pense actuellement à la question de savoir s'il existe un piège des temps modernes, la réponse est sans ambiguïté, oui, c'est un piège, un éternel piège, et ce sont des obstacles qu'on peut transformer en opportunités, et on peut transformer la dépendance en interdépendance pour avoir des relations d'égal à égal. Et j'ai 3 questions pour les panélistes. La première est comment légiférer, c'est-à-dire établir les règles pour inverser les situations actuelles, comme faire des taxes minimum sur les produits de base. Et une question me tarote l'esprit, c'est que comment créer des clauses de vente, c'est-à-dire quand une multinationale vient dans un pays où il a tiré tous les produits pour créer un produit fini, quand il revient dans ce pays, il doit y avoir un minimum de prix acceptable de vente. La deuxième question est comment renforcer la coopération régionale pour faire bénéficier à tous des produits de base à des prix accessibles. Et aussi, on a dans nos marchés, on nous vend un peu des produits qui sont tirés de chez nous et qui sont vendus plus cher. Et la dernière question, c'est une question un peu environnementale, et comment éviter la monoculture dans la production. Merci infiniment.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the representative of Argentina.
Muchas gracias y buenos días a todos. Muchas gracias al panel por este rico debate, a la moderadora por estar con nosotros. Voy a tratar de ser lo más interactivo posible y mencionar algunos puntos que fueron tratados, sobre todo cuando hablamos de oportunidades, porque al principio la moderadora mencionaba lecciones y oportunidades, y creo que es interesante focalizar en oportunidades. Sobre 2 temas que para la Argentina son de interés, que son los commodities de alimentos y, como se mencionaba también, y quizás que es uno de los temas de las oportunidades, son los minerales críticos. Primero entendemos que para cubrir la creciente demanda de alimentos a nivel global, tenemos que encontrar estrategias para producir más y mejores alimentos. Y para garantizar la oferta de alimentos y por ende el ODS 2 de seguridad alimentaria, la innovación y las nuevas tecnologías juegan un papel central. Hoy creo que había ejemplos de la industria del café, pero creo que se aplica a todos los sistemas agroalimentarios. Argentina ha adoptado prácticas y tecnologías para mejorar la sostenibilidad de la producción de los alimentos, respetando el equilibrio entre los pilares económico, social y ambiental. Sin embargo, somos conscientes de que siempre hay margen para mejorar, pero con el entendido que el sector productivo en los sistemas agroalimentarios son parte de la solución y no parte del problema. Y eso creo que tenemos que destacarlo. Otro tema, brevemente, es que si hablamos de alimentos, creo que tenemos que recordar que hay una deuda histórica en la Organización Mundial de Comercio con relación al mandato de la eliminación de los obstáculos al comercio agrícola, para que haya un comercio agrícola más eficiente y que no perjudique a los países que son eficientes en la producción de alimentos y de estos commodities. Pero también hablando de las oportunidades, la Argentina, gracias al potencial de sus recursos naturales y su trabajo relacionado con energías renovables, ofrece oportunidades para una minería sustentable. Y la minería cumple hoy un rol fundamental para que el mundo pueda avanzar en los procesos de transición energéticas bajas en carbono. materiales críticos desempeñan un papel fundamental en el avance de las tecnologías para abordar estos desafíos globales y fomentar el progreso económico, ¿no? Almacenamiento de energía, electrónica, energía limpia, son todas tecnologías posibles gracias a estos minerales estratégicos como el litio, el cobalto y otros elementos que se encuentran en tierras raras. Entonces, mantener el avance tecnológico es crucial para el desarrollo económico y la competitividad global, ya que la innovación en sectores clave depende de un suministro seguro y accesible de minerales estratégicos. Entonces, en este contexto, la Argentina está comprometida con el agregado de valor en la industria de los minerales. Y aquí creo que es la oportunidad, el agregado de valor, a través de siguientes objetivos. Uno es la diversificación económica, otro es la generación de empleo, el aumento de la competitividad, el fomento de la innovación y el desarrollo regional. En un país, por lo menos como la Argentina, de un territorio extenso, el desarrollo regional es clave también. Además, la Argentina se encuentra comprometida en agregar valor, especialmente en la cadena de obtención del litio, no solo en la producción, sino también en la implementación de prácticas sostenibles y responsables en todas las etapas del proceso. Para cerrar, creemos que los esfuerzos internacionales son esenciales para garantizar una cadena de suministro global estable en estos minerales y que la cooperación multilateral y bilateral puede establecer marcos para el intercambio de información, la investigación conjunta y respuestas coordinadas a desafíos comunes, garantizando una cadena de suministro global más predecible y resiliente. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the representative of India.
Thank you, Moderator, and please allow me to begin by expressing my delegation's deep appreciation to the President of the General Assembly for convening today's meeting, and I also wish to thank the panelists for some very valuable insights that they shared with us today. I was particularly very interested in listening to the whole conversation on coffee, the Robusta, the Arabica, because we're seeing similar transformations in India where regions which have been producing coffee for a long time are now discovering that they do indeed have markets for it. And one important example is the Araku Valley in the south of India, which is increasingly doing well. And we're happy to see that local producers in India, and as in several other developing countries, are finding the market to be able to sell their produce and get fair prices for it. During the panel discussion, we asked ourselves if there is a modern-day commodity dependence trap. And if we look at the nature of the global economy and the place that developing countries have in it, it would appear that there indeed is commodity dependence in the countries of the global south, but we can take measures to ensure that these dependencies don't become a trap. Firstly, commodity-dependent countries should be able to leverage commodities to shore up their revenues that can then be reinvested for sustainable development. And new technologies like artificial intelligence, geospatial data, can be deployed to help developing countries leverage their strengths in commodity exports, particularly those who are engaged in agricultural exports, like my own country, as we have done in recent years. Secondly, commodity-dependent developing countries must be assisted in identifying sectors in their economy that have the potential to grow, and should then be provided adequate and affordable financing, technology, and capacity building to strengthen these sectors. And finally, by sharing experiences of successful economic diversification, we can enable commodity-dependent developing countries to create a suitable policy environment for this type of diversification. And in this regard, India is always happy to share its own experience of strengthening the innovation and technology ecosystem, particularly in the last decade, which has created the world's third largest startup ecosystem in India, which is in stark contrast from half a century ago when agriculture overwhelmingly dominated the Indian economy. And with that, I wish to thank you for your attention.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the representative of the American Pakistan Foundation.
Thank you, Madam Moderator, for giving me the floor, and the panelists for your valuable insights. The American Pakistan Foundation, rooted in its mission to empower the Pakistani American community, fosters bridges between the United States and America, and recognizes the profound implications of commodity dependence traps and strategies for economic diversification, particularly for commodity-dependent developing countries. These nations are caught in a cycle of vulnerability, with their economic stability heavily reliant on the commodity markets. This dependence hampers industrial diversification, hinders innovation, and undermines sustainable growth, leaving them disproportionately affected by the ramifications of climate change and the global shift towards renewable energy sources. The American Pakistan Foundation strongly advocates for collaborative efforts to promote economic diversification in commodity-dependent countries, focusing on enhancing technological capacities and innovation ecosystems. This includes adopting strategies to increase value addition and garnering support from international financial institutions, development banks, and member states for diversification projects such as agribusiness development and renewable energy initiatives. Emphasizing a low-carbon path and capitalizing on rapid technological advancements are crucial for a sustainable and inclusive economic transformation. Collective action and international cooperation are crucial in enabling these countries to transition towards a more diversified, sustainable, and resilient economic model. The American Pakistan Foundation is committed to contributing to this dialogue, leveraging our experiences and insights to support the transformative journey of commodity-dependent developing countries towards sustainable development. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the representative from DESA.
Thank you so much. It is really an honor to represent DESA in this important discussion. And I would like to bring up to you, first of all, a short summary of the discussion that took place exactly in the same room on Wednesday at the occasion of the ECOSOC Financing for Development Forum follow-up. The session, as you know, trade is one of the 7 areas of the Addis Ababa Action Agenda. And as you may know, there would be an international conference on financing for development in Spain in 2025. In that context, the forum brought all the 7 areas to discuss with member states what are the policies, ideas, new ways of considering the issues that affect economic development and financing for development in particular. And while traditional areas of trade that have been in the FFD forum and FFD process for a while were discussed, including obviously multilateral trading system, the role of WTO, and others, primary commodities was really, I think, the most important point that was brought up, both by the panelists, which included the Deputy Secretary General of UNCTAD, and other representatives from the governments, and also from the Common Fund from Commodities. They really pointed out at the issues that have been affecting commodity-dependent countries since times immemorial, and most importantly, what can be done in this in the international context. While the panelists today have brought us back to the national possibilities, to the importance of productive capacity of diversification and national policies, the discussions on Wednesday also went to what can the international community do? How can this discussion that has affected countries and that seems to be impossible to solve can be addressed at this point. Interestingly, the discussions of the 1950s of terms of trade of manufacturers, that the prices of commodities, relative terms to manufacturers, have been going down since centuries, was brought in. And it was brought because It seems like the problem of commodity dependence has not improved, as the Secretary General of UNCTAD mentioned today, that we have 15 more countries that are now commodity dependent, but the situation may have also gotten worse. One of the points that was mentioned in that meeting was the issue of financialization, the issue of how the commodity exchanges and the speculation in those markets have changed in nature. It is no longer only a trading activity that offers liquidity, price discovery, and risk management tools, but it's also a place in which the fluctuations of the global economy have been brought in. When the crisis in 2008 came, there was a massive change in markets, in financial markets, towards the commodity exchanges markets. And that brought high volatility and high negative effects for many countries that imported commodities when the prices went going on, and that export commodities when prices go down. And this is really important work that UNCTAD is also doing in the Trade and Development Report. We in DESA have been exploring what can be done and what can be said in an international agreement to support developing countries to solve an issue that seems to be really escaping policy recommendations. We have been mentioning economic diversification for 75 years, yet still half of our countries at the UN continue to be commodity dependent. So one of these issues that could be subject of a discussion at the international level is the role of commodity exchanges. Commodity exchanges certainly offer market participants instruments to hedge against price fluctuations. Yet, it is not without research and without discussion that they also have many issues that could be considered. And this is all very important because you consider commodities and you think about volatile prices or low prices, but you almost never ask yourself where those prices are coming from. It is basically as if they were given and nothing could be done about them. It is a market that functions as a market, but there is an institution that was created, there are institutions that were created in the 18th century and have been evolving that help create those prices, that help those prices to exist, and they are not international institutions. They are private sector institutions. They have, they may require renewed attention going forward. There is certainly volatility and speculation. There is, the volatility affects producers in developing countries that rely on commodity exports, and also consumers that face price fluctuations. It also is not necessarily the most transparent market institution. It impacts producers, small-scale producers in agriculture and raw material sectors. This really affects the macroeconomics in developing countries. If the cycles of commodity prices affect the positions of developing countries in terms of macro, external debt, and others. They affect also socioeconomic and environmental concerns that they bring up. We have unsustainable production practices. We have a trade that goes still over the ocean, bringing primary commodities that have not been processed to a place and then brought back. And this certainly includes emissions of carbon. There are many, many regulatory challenges. There is not necessarily too much oversight. There are regulatory loopholes. In summary, while we consider obviously that it is important for developing countries to improve productive capacity, that it is important for partners to support that and support technology transfer, it is also very important to think about what kind of institutions are intermediating these markets. It's not only the big companies, it is also the place where those transactions are being made. And addressing this would really be important. We can consider that maybe governments, regulators, industry stakeholders, civil society can really support initiatives to enhance transparency, to implement regulatory measures, and to also promote responsible trading practices. This would help very much in prioritizing sustainable development over profits. It would also help in rethinking in the minds of policymakers and all that primary products do not need to be commodities. Commodities is a concept that makes things interchangeable and that reduces the value because it focuses on low prices and efficiency and not in quality. And I think it's also important to consider that if countries have 90% of their economies or their exports in these products, it is not also fair to tell them, forget about that, it's always going to be a curse and it's also going to be a trap. It may be time to also tell them, what else can you do with those products? What has Costa Rica and the rest of Central America done with their coffee that it's sold as a luxury? What has been done in terms of chocolate that is also sold in a very different way? What is Indonesia and Brazil doing changing the extractives markets? It's just an invitation from us, and also in my personal capacity as an academic, to reconsider primary commodities as something that countries can be proud to produce, proud to process, and proud to sell, and proud to bring to their families that raise cocoa trees to say, no, your children can go to school. Prices can be higher so that they can go to school and you can all benefit. So thank you so much for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you. To try and sum up all the contributions from member states and from organizations would take us at least the length of this panel again, I believe. A few points that caught my eye I'll mention, and then I'll turn to the panelists to see if they have some response or there's points they would like to respond to. We heard there about the importance of initiatives at country level to upskill and to develop and support industries. Also, how some countries have managed to develop downstream industries and the importance of doing that. We heard too how the industry should be treated as a part of the solution and not the problem, particularly in agricultural commodities. And we've just been listening to some very good points on the dangers of financialization or the risk of very powerful financial forces within commodity pricing. Panelists, would you like to respond? Vanessa, I'll start with you.
Okay. Well, thank you for all the contributions, all the reflections, all the questions. I think this is very important for us. There are many points, Jennifer, that we already talked about, we already mentioned here. And I'd like to say that as head of the International Coffee Organization, we are totally open to share our experiences in coffee to other crops, other products with your countries, even though you are not a coffee producer or like Argentina, and but with a huge agro there. And we can talk and we can see what we can contribute with you. That we will be very proud of that. To the Indian delegate, I would like to say that we are in a very, very close discussion and dialogue with the Indian Coffee Authority. And we are seeing some solutions for this specific point that you mentioned, that it's related to the solution will be involved the increase of the local consumption and also the regional consumption, that we think that we will have a very good life and we can offer a very good life. And there is a huge potential in your region for increase the coffee consumption. And one of the examples that we are using for analyzing this is the Brazilian example. Brazil, in our days, already consumes internally around, it's 1/3 of the coffee that the country produces, but it's almost the same amount of coffee that the second biggest producer in the world, that it's Vietnam, produces. And Brazil, it's consuming a lot of coffee, and this helped a lot all the supply chain, because the costs of logistics that we have to transfer this coffee internally, it's quite low. And we can add value internally in the country for this coffee as well. I'd like to take this moment, this opportunity also to thanks all the support that we have been receiving and we are still receiving from the German government for our coffee public and private task force. GIZ, it's a key partner for us, and we just signed a joint declaration with the BMZ as well to help us. And GIZ, it's a very strategic partner worldwide to help us in these opportunities and this challenge, to address the solutions for this challenge in many of the producing countries. Thank you for your contribution.
Thank you, Vanessa. Jane?
Thank you so much, Jennifer. And thank you so much to the comments coming out from the delegates. Very good comments. And for me, my takeaway really is that for especially African countries struggling in this debt commodity dependence trap, there are examples out there. And Jennifer, that's the good news you were asking. You know, there is light out there. You know, there is light at the end of that tunnel. You know, when I listen to Malaysia, Indonesia, you know, African countries can be able to pick a leaf from those countries. What's also coming out clearly is that there is increasing demand for commodities, minerals because of the energy transition, but also coffee, cocoa, you know, all those minerals, food, the demand is there. So the onus is also on African countries as individual countries, as regions, for example, as Africa Union, to be able to strengthen their policies and strategies, to be able to negotiate. You know, Germany was clear, they need the minerals, but they're also looking at how to add value at national level. It won't be an accident. It has to be planned for. So the onus is also on those countries to be able to organize themselves, to negotiate with you know, the countries which need the resources. The issue of technology transfer has come up, and these are issues, I think, which should also be addressed in the WTO. In the WTO, there is the working group on technology transfer, which needs to be strengthened, and things need to be accelerated. But again, commodity dependent countries need to be clear what kind of technology they need transferred. The issue of trade barriers has also come up. The issue of trade barriers, Jennifer, is very important. You take an example, the European Union gave us everything but arms initiative, EBA, bring everything but arms. But the moment you add value, the tariffs go up, which is called tariff escalation. So all those barriers, I think we need to rethink those barriers. Another important issue which has come up is the issue of the sustainability issue, the directives coming out of a number of countries, like the European Union. And I think, Vanessa, this is also an issue which you need to address with the coffee producing countries, the issue of the directives, the deforestation directives. And again here, I think producing countries, we need a lot of capacity to be able to implement these directives. Lastly, the issue of financialization is really, really important. And I think as member states, there's a need to rethink how to harness finance to development and to structure transformation. There is a link now between finance and development, and yet they should be complementary. And lastly, the issue of reforming the global economic governance is critical if our countries are going to get out of the commodity dependence trap. I thank you so much, and I thank UNCTAD and the UN for organizing this interactive dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. Our colleague Guangzhou had to leave early. Helke, anything you would like to add as his colleague?
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer. I can definitely join the other panelists in their comment, and I thank member countries for their statements and support. And I have written myself some key words which will resonate with me, and I thought they are probably, at least for me as takeaways, the most important: the creation of local sustainable value chain, diversification and value addition, the right policies at all levels, sustainability, capacity and institution building, technology transfer, and science and innovation. Definitely all of these important activities, FAO supports those already for something like 70 years. So we have a dedicated division which is supporting member countries. We have a specific technical committee which meets every 2 years, and we have also bodies which interact with the private sector. Like, for example, last month we had the 4th Global Conference on World Banana Forum, which deals with certain commodities. So we have similar bodies for coffee, for tea. So experts meet there, they discuss their problems and their solutions. And what I liked, what resonated with me was from the Argentinian delegate, that agriculture is part of the solution and not the problem. And you, Jennifer, you mentioned also that the industry is the solution and not the problem. So I think from our side, we are trying to see where is the solution, and that's FAO stands ready to support member countries in finding the solutions and helping in the nearest future to close the commodity trap. Thank you.
Thank you. It's, in trying to sum up what we've discussed this morning, it's quite possible to feel entirely overwhelmed, but I personally feel optimistic after hearing the contributions, the suggestions, and examples of the work that's going on at the moment. There is much to be done, we know that. There is no one set of policies that will do it. It's a lot of work. We've talked about successes as well, which is always a good thing. Let's learn from the examples. This can be done. We talked also about the need for goodwill, and this comes from all stakeholders, which is essentially all of us. I hope you found the panel as informative, the session and the comments as informative and thought-provoking as I have. And the last line I'll go with is one from Jane there, that there is light out there and that more can be done. It just remains for me to thank the panelists and everyone else who's contributed to the session. And before concluding, I'd just like to remind you that the second interactive panel will take place this afternoon at 3 p.m. in this chamber. Interactive panel discussion 1 is now concluded. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you.